I don't know whether or not I should be amused or distressed. And I'm going to talk about ethics and responsibility on a day when there are 7 of you in the room out of over 30. You are. I'm very happy for you all. I'm just kind of annoyed at the rest of them. So, oops. All right. Well, we'll go with it anyway. Because there's a difference in I'm responsible, I show up, and what does it mean to be behaving ethically, especially in regards to our use of data. What are the challenges here? What are the pieces that I need to be careful of when I think about ethical behavior? I mean, I could summarize the entire next 3 classes in one sentence. Don't be a jerk, but that's really a very broad idea. And you've got hundreds of years and thousands of books of writing on what it means to not be a jerk like that. So we should spend a little more time. I mean, what are some of the pieces I need to be taking care of here? If I'm not practicing responsible data use and being ethical in the way I write the things I'm doing, I can get algorithms that favor one group over another and amplify biases that already exist. Whether that involves something mundane or something very potentially dangerous is going to depend on the situation. I have the same idea when I train an algorithm in AI, when I design my model, whether that's simply a trend line in Excel based on the forecasting data I'm using, or something more complicated in an AI setting. If there are biases visible in my training data, I can end up with that same bias being amplified further out. There could be a lack of transparency. You know, the numbers say so. It is a crap reason. So I need to be careful of whether or not you find me trustworthy as somebody who implements the algorithm we're working with. Depends on how transparent and straightforward it is. I need to act with integrity. I need to act with fairness. I need to make sure that I view other people's actions the same way. Everybody deserves the same credit I get for the things we are doing together. But let's think about specific to data work. What's involved here? What does data privacy mean? Come on, you all have some data that you have already signed away rights and privilege to, and you have other data that is legally protected. What's it mean to enact data privacy for the data you're looking at? It is my responsibility as somebody who does a survey or gathers a piece of information to make sure that sensitive parts of that stay protected from misuse. Whether that's misuse by me or the company I'm working for, or gets out into the public. So unauthorized access could mean as simple as I left my laptop open and somebody walking by saw something, to there was a cyber attack and my entire database was stolen by somebody. I don't know if that's going to be a big deal. My computer really contains a bunch of grading data. Woo! But if I had access to the financial section of the university and somebody was able to get into that through my laptop, I could compromise every one of your banking accounts in about a minute. It's important to keep that idea of scope in mind. When I collect data, the data I collect will reflect the history, the trends, and the biases of the collector and the audience from whom I collect. And that means that if I think about bias in the data, I can think about the result being unintended favoritism or discrimination in the collection and the analysis and the algorithms we use. Now, in terms of the emphasis here in my head is the word unintended, because I will tell you up front, with 100% assurance, the word discrimination in and of itself isn't a bad word. There is a common phrase in marketing that one has discriminating taste. Or when one discusses food, one has a discriminating palate. I discriminate every single day that I grade a paper. This is right, this is wrong. When it comes to grading essays or written work, I have to set aside my opinion of the topic and look at the correctness of the answer. Does this answer the question that was asked? It's a very different kind of discrimination, and that's intended. So it's very important here that we think about the goal of the process. When I say that there is transparency in the process, it means I can explain it to you. I know what happened. I know what factors were weighted in what behavior. I understand what came out, and I understand why the decision got made the way it did. If a process is transparent, it cannot be seen as arbitrary. It cannot be seen as capricious. I'm using those words deliberately because they show up in the law. Arbitrary and capricious decisions get overturned. They get thrown out fairly regularly. Somebody somewhere is the accountable party. I don't know who it is who is responsible for the decision made by a self-driving car. This is a reasonable question to ask in multiple ways. If I am down in Oakland, in Pittsburgh, and I step off the corner and get hit by a Pat bus, the driver of that bus is responsible. I am responsible in some fashion. And therefore, the city of Pittsburgh may end up being responsible for that decision. But if I step off that same curb and get hit by a self-driving car that has no one in it, it's on its way to pick up somebody. Waymo was driving up the street, ran my ass over. Who's responsible? The company? Maybe. The people who wrote the algorithm, the people who designed the quote-unquote sight modules, the computer recognition system. Who's responsible for the decision made by a computer? I would hope the answer is the owner, Adam. I really would. But Waymo leases their cars. They don't own them. If I buy a Tesla, technically, I'm leasing the software. How many of you have read the entire end user license agreement when you update the software on your MacBook or your phone? You know for a fact you don't own any of the software on your phone right now? Every time you click accept, you are accepting a lease on the software, which means they can take it away, they can change it, they can do what they want with it. Unless you read the details and know what you own and what you don't. Apple has the complete right to change the look and feel and functionality of their operating system. And as long as you click yes on the little checkbox when you updated your iPhone, it's theirs. So who cares? Why does this matter? In a very simple statement, somebody tell me why I should give a crap. You didn't expect the athletes to be actually exercising upstairs. Downstairs in admin 308, this is piano. And regularly, Mr. DeSanti would teach history of jazz in that. And so I'd be up here giving an exam, and they'd be down there doing rhythm. And all sorts of interesting music would be coming up to entertain us during the exam. Used to some of this. Why does ethics matter to us? Okay, so apparently we're a bunch of unethical slobs. We're all going to go out and commit crimes all the time. None of you have a reason to be ethical? Please, I know it's early in the day still. Talk to me. Have more coffee. Wake up. hey, in the accounting world, I commit fraud, I'm going to end up going to jail. That's a bad thing. My company's going to go bankrupt because I get sued by everybody, and I'm going to go to jail. So there are legal repercussions here. For example, from a data perspective, there are the EU's GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation. In California, there's this thing called the California Consumer Privacy Act. All of those lay out my legal responsibilities for the data I collect. And violating them can cost me a lot of money and can lose my business access to markets. The GDPR covers the entire EU. If I do business in Europe, or I collect data in Europe for my business over here, that data is I am responsible to follow that act in regard to the data. I don't want to get sued. So let's stick with this idea. I don't want to go to jail. I don't want to get sued. A civil action can be brought by anybody who perceives my activities as unfair. I'm going to put that in quotes, the word fair, because the definition of fair is now going to depend on the situation. I want to be seen as behaving ethically to prevent discrimination, to avoid impropriety, to ensure that I am not doing bad things. Not just not doing them, but to have it known that I am not doing them. But in this same fashion, I want to prevent harm. Here's a question for you. Would you give your parents every single password to every account you have today? All of them. Not just the ones they know about, all of them. The definition of preventing harm in data terms is a lot larger than you might think. I'm not actually out not to hurt people physically, but financially, emotionally, societally. There's a lot more to harm here in terms of the data I've got collected on people. And in the long run, that is all about building trust. Brody, you said you were talking about from the accounting perspective, right? Who's going to come see me as an accountant if they can't trust me to be private with their financials? I'm not going to get hired by anybody at that case. So let's think about what it takes. When it comes to having data and being responsible with it. If I want people to trust me, I need to make sure there's respect for privacy there. And that means when I survey someone or I ask them a question, they have to know exactly what I'm going to do with the answer, where I'm going to keep it, and how I'm going to safeguard it. If I am working at a hospital, I have access to a lot of personal data. Every medication you have been prescribed is in front of you. All the reasons you've been prescribed it are available to me. I don't want to know what medications you are taking. But I want you to think about that list. Is it small or not? Those of you that are athletes have to report the medications you take to the NCAA for compliance. And if any of them are what? Steroidal precursors, you could be DQ'd or removed from your team immediately. But if I do research at a hospital, then I have access to a lot of this data. And if I'm doing research, that data has to become anonymized. I can't have any names associated with people I'm working with. Salary data. Do you know how much somebody in the front of a classroom here at Seton Hill makes? I have no idea. I know how much I make. I don't know how much anybody else makes. But a number of years ago, we did a salary breakdown to compare salaries at Seton Hill with salaries of universities of similar size and background. And they gave us some data. People who are assistant professors made these salaries. Associate professors made these salaries. Full professors made these salaries. People who taught in the humanities made these salaries. People who taught in the sciences made these salaries. People who taught in business made these salaries. They were unable to break down by gender and rank at the same time. Because if you looked at the full professors in the sciences, there were two of them, one male and one female. So if I broke it down that much, I'd know exactly how much each person made. That's not publicly disclosed data. That's private data. So I have to be able to respect that. I've got some examples coming up. But when I talk about avoiding bias, my goal is to avoid bias in several different ways. There was a police station in Pittsburgh that was closed, and they were going to build a new building. The building itself was in disrepair. They were looking at where to put it. And they asked, from the old position of the building, what are the response times to the most frequently called places? And they went back 15 years in data to figure out what the most frequently called places were. Problem. This was done in the 70s. And the historical data meant they went to African American neighborhoods a lot more than they went to white neighborhoods. Is it racism at hand there? I don't know. But clearly the police officers policed and responded to crimes in those areas much more frequently in the 50s and 60s. If I did that same study today, how could I avoid the potential bias of the data that already exists? These two go together. Ensuring transparency means that everybody has to be able to understand what the data did. I have to be able to explain the decision that came out. I have to follow the laws to that end that say I must be able to explain the process. If you apply for a credit card, there are several different consumer protection acts that require me to tell you why you don't get it if I reject it, or why I set the rate I set for your credit card. Promoting accountability means somebody is responsible for the decision. People, this news is less than a month old. March 26th, a lawsuit in this country, a jury trial, said YouTube and Meta are liable for the algorithm's design and the harm it caused to a woman's psychology and her mental health. $3 million verdict. There are over 1,600 more cases waiting to be turned into a class action lawsuit. That's $5 billion if all the awards are the same size. The previous day, Meta was ordered to pay $375 million over a lawsuit in child exploitation. Do you know the reason for that exploitation ruling? How many of you have gotten on a social media app, looked up and noticed it's 2 hours later? That infinite scroll routine, that's the lawsuit. Not only did we build a machine whose wiring goes directly into your brain and says, ooh, dopamine, yeah. But we made it so it lasts forever. You can keep scrolling until the cows. In the late 50s, there was a very simple experiment done. It involved a battery, a wire, button, and a mouse. The wire went into the skull of the mouse and connected electrically directly to the dopamine-producing pleasure center in the brain. You push the button, battery goes, you get happy. What happened to the mouse? The mouse starved to death. With food and water right next to the button, it didn't eat. Push that button over and over and over. I would love to tell you that the algorithm is designed to keep you engaged. And it is okay for you to turn off your phone. How many of you have done that? Simply said, no, I'm done with this app. I'm uninstalling it because it makes me waste 3 hours of time. See? There's some level of, I'm spending too much time on Facebook or Instagram or TikTok or whatever. I got to get out of this thing. In the 50s, we realized addiction is actually biological. Once you trigger that brain chemistry enough, the brain can't go without it. $375 million less than 4 weeks ago. Potentially as much as $5 billion the next day. So how do I think about what to do to make sure I can do these things? somewhere in here, in all of the other courses we've been dealing with, whether you're an accountant, a marketing major, a finance major, a data science major, a computer science major, you are going to be involved with some pile of data at some point and have to behave in an appropriate fashion with it. What can I do to help me not fuck it up? Because that's really the goal. I don't want to go to jail. Brody, I apologize for picking on you. You're the one who said accounting here specifically. At some point, you'll take a CPA exam. There is somewhere on the CPA uniform code of ethics for CPAs, and I'm sure Dr. Mahady or Dr. Warfield will talk to you about ethical behavior as an accountant. What do I do? What's an acceptable practice for the field I'm working in? What are the principles I should abide by? There's got to be a code of ethical behavior. If I don't have one specific to the project I'm working on, even if it isn't in writing, if it's just a discussion with you, your clients, your boss, and the other affected parties, it's got to be developed. It's got to be put into practice. And then it's got to be checked up on. Now, the word audit to an accountant means something different than it does to me as a data person. When I think of auditing, I'm thinking of auditing the data and the algorithm and the practice I'm doing to see if I've missed something. Is there a place in this algorithm where I've got a confounding variable? Did you know that ice cream sales and drownings go together? Why do more people drown when I sell more ice cream? Because the weather is warm and they're at the beach swimming because it's summer, and ice cream sales go up and drownings go up. Very few people drown in the middle of winter because they stay the hell away from the lakes. Exactly. So there's a confounding variable. There's another underlying reason that connects to both of those. But if you wrote down, hey, ice cream sales and drownings go hand in hand, don't sell ice cream, we'll save people's lives, they'd call you an idiot. So when I talk about auditing my algorithm, I'm looking for additional background variables that might matter. Something that isn't obvious from the data, but might be an underlying piece. Now that actually is helped out by having more eyes on the project, and not just more of the same eyes. So here's a place where I'm going to use something the government considers a dirty word: a diverse set of perspectives. It pays to have people not like you look at what you're doing, because they'll come from different backgrounds and see things differently. And that will help me get rid of my blind spots and my prejudices, intentional or unintentional, so that I can make sure that I'm getting inclusive, equitable, fair solutions. And those all mean different things. I had a very interesting conversation over the past 2 weeks in email and news groups and newsletters, mailing lists, talking about remedial education in mathematics. Did you know that the University of California at Santa Barbara this year gave a remedial math course to over 650 students? When they first created this remedial math course 10 years ago, it was given to 12 students. They gave a test. The first question, I wish I was making this up. You have 5 nickels and 5 quarters. How many coins do you have? How much is it worth? How many coins? 1 in 5 people got it wrong. That is a second grade question in the American system. Second grade. 5 plus 5, you're done. 20% of the people got it wrong. Sorry, 18%, so just a little bit less. Why? Why is this happening? They did a bunch of survey data. They tried to figure out what's going on. We've been talking about this for 2 weeks in a mailing list I'm part of. My perception of what I think is wrong, it clearly is outside. I have nothing to do with the California state system of education. But I asked the same question about Pennsylvania. Again, thinking about transparency. I collect all this data. I do my analysis. I store all that data. And eventually I get rid of it. It's been a little over 7 years at this point, now that I think about it. I had lots of exams in my office. People will get a grade in a course, get all pissed off about the grade, and complain. I took the final exam. I did pretty good. Well, here's your final exam. I happen to have it right here. Let's go through it. I had probably 5 or 6 years worth of exams in 2 boxes in my office. I was told, quote unquote. Yeah, I was sitting in Sassmore's office. He was talking to somebody else, and I looked over and I saw the box, and the class I'm in was on top, and it was last year's final, so I took one. The day after I was told that, I bought a locking filing cabinet. All my exams are stored and locked. And when I throw them out, I don't throw them out on campus. I take them to be shredded. But I'm supposed to keep them for 4 years. That's somebody's collegiate lifetime, quote unquote. So I have 4 years worth of exams under lock and key. But what happens to them? What do I do? Because we have an analysis system for Seton Hill that says we're doing our job. I have to analyze those exams. And then I don't want to go to jail. So I'm going to follow the laws. Now, please understand, quite literally, 2 days ago, the governor of Pennsylvania signed new laws about data protection and data privacy. So that changes all the time. I have to keep on top of it. I'm pretty sure I talked about this back when we were talking about AI in the first place. We talked about facial recognition systems. You talked about handwriting recognition and recognizing numbers when you write a check and deposit it into an ATM. The check doesn't ask you to type in the dollar amount, it just reads it. And it reads it by recognizing what dots go with what numbers. And then I said, take those same dots and put them on a face and do facial recognition. I have a video for you on our Canvas page. I think it's posted. In our Module 7 files, please go take a look. Tell me if there is a link to a short video called Slaughter Bots. I might not have hit publish, I don't remember. Is it visible? Okay, then I must not have published it. Let me go back to our Canvas page and see if I can get there from here. That's going to be on this page. Click. Here we are, Module 7. Oh, no, you're right. I didn't publish it. So let's click that. This movie is 6 years old. It's about 10, 12 minutes long. Watch it. Be warned, content warning, trigger warning, violence, gunshots, explosions in a college auditorium. It is quite a reasonable idea. In 2019, the idea was fiction. In 2026, it is possible. What is the size of the average drone? Somebody was flying one right outside this building when I came over to come to class. How big is a drone? There are some that are about, I don't know, 2 feet, but there are some that will fit in the palm of your hand. Take the one that fits in the palm of your hand and put a camera on it. Now do facial recognition on that. Hey, I'm going to follow you around because I think you're a bad guy. There it is overhead, right? And then I put half an ounce of C4 in it. Have it land on your head and blow up. Not only is that doable, I can do it with parts off the shelf today. Buying C4 might get me in trouble, but there's a chemistry lab across the street. Give me some time. Follow the laws is an important piece, not just for the data I got, but for the data I could get. By the way, this story that if you choose to watch this video, this story is not new. Because right here is a story from 1953 by the science fiction author Philip K. Dick, who, by the way, is the person who wrote the novel that became Blade Runner. This story, called Second Version, is about an AI war between the Soviet Union and America. That's how old this is. Based off of the idea that the AI is building the weapons. But they look like people. There is a lot of this story in the Terminator franchise. So it's not an unpopular idea. It's only about 12 pages of story. It was published in Astounding Science Fiction magazine in 1953. But even if I'm not using it for lethal purposes, let's think about facial recognition. I grew up in the South. Grew up in Miami, but I went to school at the University of Florida, which is in northern end of the Panhandle in Florida. And it is the South, y'all. And I cannot tell you the number of times I heard somebody say, it don't matter, they all look alike to me. My facial recognition camera and all the software that goes with it is routinely criticized for making mistakes because the training data is white people. And if you're brown, it won't recognize your face as well. Whether you're brown because you are from Africa, African American, Latino, Asian, it doesn't matter. They all look alike to the camera. No, that's a bias in the training data. The training data was the white engineering group that put the camera and facial recognition software together. Pennsylvania police are outlawed from using facial recognition cameras as primary identification in court cases of people. However, those same cameras can read license plates at over 1,000 feet. So, I have to keep track of the legislation and the changes that occur to make sure I am following the law. But the law is not proscriptive. It is not forward action. It is restrictive. Don't do these things. You must do these things. They're very different behaviors because what's not in there in any of that is you should do this, or this is the right thing to do. And that's a matter that's beyond legality. I will address this in a little more detail in the statistics courses. We'll talk about model fitting in quant methods. But when I think about biases, in sampling, they come in a bunch of different ways. We need representative samples. They should reflect the population I'm looking at. If I survey people at the grocery store, say, what products do you buy here at this grocery store? Well, I could just take the receipts off of the registers, right? But how many transactions do you think happen at the Giant Eagle in Murraysville every day? If I only survey people who spend over $150 each shopping trip, I'll see a skew towards higher end products, I expect, or towards large families, right? There'd be some confounding variables there. And we do this here at Seton Hill. If you earn an A in this course, that's more important than the A you get in connections. Why? Connections is an important course. But why is an A in connections worth less than an A here?
Can you talk about that like
Freshman seminar.
okay.
1 credit course, this is a 3 credit course. It counts less. If you have 20 assignments in a semester and you do 18 of them, and they're all worth the same number of points, then it doesn't matter which 2 you didn't do, right? But if you look at the assignments for this course, some of the projects are much more point heavy than things like the learning module posts. So which assignments you don't do matters because the point values matter. A weighted average versus an unweighted average. Such a thing is called a selection bias, where some groups are overrepresented, some groups are underrepresented. Some courses count more than others. Some assignments count more than. But all of this is data that I get whether you ask me to or not. The other side of this is something called non-response bias. In the past 6 months, how many of you have answered your phone when you didn't recognize the number called? Who did it turn out to be? Anything important? An internship application, so it was a good thing you were answering those numbers, right? When I get a number I don't know, there's usually something on the phone that says spam call, unknown number, but some of them actually say political. One of the recent pieces of legislation required that political phone calls have to be labeled as such, especially on cellular devices that identify the callers. Have any of you answered a survey call like that? Okay, so your political opinions clearly count a lot, Brown. This is not a single hand raised. Non-response bias. You're going to get sometime in the next 3 weeks an email that says, please fill out the course evaluation for this course. By my history, I expect less than half of you will do it. So what happens? When I get a course evaluation, what do I know? It's either the people who really like me or who think I'm shit and nothing in between. Because those people didn't bother to fill it out. If you felt strongly that I am the worst teacher on the face of humanity, you'll say so. If you think I'm God's gift to education, you'll say so. But the people are like, they don't even bother to take the time to fill out the survey. I sat in class and watched a student give a presentation. We used to lock people out of campus. They didn't do their evaluations. I watched somebody stand up at the podium, turn their computer on, plug it in, realize they were locked out because they hadn't done the evaluation for that class, and did it right there in front of the professor on the screen. The entire class. Watch them click 3, just drag straight in. Was that a worthwhile survey? On the other hand, there's a thing called survivorship bias. Okay, athletes. You got a lucky pair of socks, a lucky jersey, good glove, a good sweatband. I don't know. You have a bad pair of socks, bad glove. No, you throw them out, right? We spend a lot more time talking about the survivors, the good things, the positive outcomes, than we do about the negative things. And so I will find things that I think may have affected that. And the survivors, the good outcomes, the ones that stick in my head, become the larger portion of the data. Now, it is possibly the least beneficial thing for me to say, because I hope you have very few failures. But I think your failures will teach you more than your successes. I know they did for me. But you'll learn by failing over and over and over. You do something wrong until finally you do it right. I am the last person you want to take athletic advice from. But you go out and practice, right? Athletes, you do practice until you get it right. And then you maintain that by practicing. When I was a young child, I did martial arts. And I will say the following sentence pissed me off for a solid year. When you throw a front kick, kick with your knee. I said, you don't kick with your knee, you hit somebody with your foot. What do you mean kick with your knee? But that's the only version of that instruction I got for a year. And so one day, I kicked with my knee. And I understood what he meant. And from then on, I realized that was exactly the right way to say it. That's the action. But I learned by failing. Survivorship bias means we look at the success stories. We sold really well in this program. We did really well in this region. Look at those. We stunk over here. The reverse is also possible. It is possible to spend more time on your failures than you should. But that is less common. I had never heard of this term before using this textbook, but the phrase is called data snooping. And I thought, well, that means going back and finding something that's hidden, right? No. In terms of biases, data snooping is about overanalyzing a single data set. This one type. If I have one pile of data and I build a model from it, then I'm going to assume that pile of data is all I needed. And everything else should conform to that. But that can force the model to find patterns that are just specific to that piece of data. The adage is when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. if I only have one data set and I'm only doing one kind of model with it, then that model may be too restrictive to add new data. It's also a good way to waste resources. If I overanalyze and I say, hey, there's a connection between these two things, and not understand the underlying reasons for either of them to go together, I'm not going to restrict ice cream scales to prevent drownings. And I certainly can't control the weather in either case. So I need to look at what the analysis is, and then I'll have data that isn't relevant in my model. In BU 451, the decision making and analytics course, will address model variable selection in more detail. By the way, this happens when we do our t-tests and our z-tests. Remember back in our inferential statistics modules? If I'm testing more than one thing at the same time, that increases the likelihood of a false positive. And that's a bad thing. There are other tests we can do. Instead of just doing a t-test or a z-test, if I have multiple things, we did an ANOVA, right? And an ANOVA uses a different distribution. So there's a different way to do this. ANOVA, MANOVA, and COVA, there are all sorts of different variations on these ideas. Again, tests we'll see in more detail as we go along. When I deal with overanalysis, my best bet is to try and hold back some of my data, or to go get another data set to validate my model. There are ways to adjust your sensitivity of your tests. The alpha value that we set to 0.05, 0.05 was just pulled out of thin air. If I'm testing more things, maybe I should do something different. This, by the way, relates to the idea that things can be related for absolutely no good reason at all. Again, on our Canvas page, in Module 7, there's a website here, the Spurious Correlations website. You should click on that. And then click Random. I didn't know this. Did you? You are more likely to see a UFO in Maryland the more popular the name Annabelle gets. The p-value is less than 0.01. Those are related. What sort of publicly available databases for names are all over the web. Publicly available databases for UFO sightings are available all over the web. I'm going to hit Random. Electricity generated in Antarctica correlates with PV 0.01 with the number of septic tank servicers and sewer pipe cleaners in Alabama. Look at those two graphs. They go together really well, don't they? Do you think these two things are related? But if I was just looking at the data analysis, the p-value is less than 0.01. My t-test will say this is related. Bull crap. Drew Barrymore controls the votes in Alabama. Overanalyze the data set, you can see a lot of weird stuff. By the way, this is number 5,868 in this website. So there are over 6,000 different examples of things that are clearly related to each other statistically that should have nothing to do with each other. Oh, and in order to make this absolutely insane, the person who runs this website built an AI model, a generative AI, to explain the reasoning, and then to write an AI-generated academic-sounding paper. So can you imagine submitting to a journal a paper on how Drew Barrymore affects the votes in Alabama? There's the paper. He made it up. It's complete bullshit. He's not the first person to do this sort of thing. By the way, you'll notice this button here says discover a new correlation. You can actually get the same data sets he's using. We talked a bit about confidence intervals, and our confidence interval is another place where I can have a bias go by. There are easily created misconceptions about confidence intervals. If confidence intervals end up overlapping, it means the differences between the two things are probably not important. We'll talk about this when we do two sample t-tests and z-tests in statistics. There's a lot here that I can use to deal with the biases that I'm running into. I was at a conference 4 weeks ago, and a group of students presented on using AI and different models to predict the price of coffee. This was a financial forecasting model they built. And they were using coffee futures, and they went back and used 32 years worth of data. And I asked a question, and they said, oh no. The question I asked was, where did you deal with the inflationary adjustment of the dollar? Because if you spend $10 today, that's different than spending $10 in 1996, because the dollar had a different value because of inflation. And they had not run inflation numbers through their dollars. It still was okay because they were comparing the different models to each other, not to some abstract standard. So using the same data set for all the models was all they had to do. But when they heard me say, oh, no, we hadn't inserted inflation in there, that was a bias they hadn't thought to run into. My goal is to mitigate biases wherever I encounter them. I want to be able to identify the bias. I want to be able to address it and minimize its effects on my data analysis. Each different kind of bias we've run into has a mitigation strategy. But then somewhere in there, we've got to make decisions on what pieces of biased information are acceptable and what aren't. We'll talk about that more on Tuesday. We'll leave you with just one comment. You are reminded when things do on Tuesday. I will see you all then. Have a wonderful day.